Good morning, everyone. This is Heather Drake, Maine Public Health Association's membership manager, and we're happy to welcome you to week 2 of our annual conference. Just a couple of quick updates before we get started. We have had some changes to the agenda, and you should have received an email yesterday about that. So please check your inbox, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. They've also all been updated on the conference website. And we've also fixed the glitch we had with our evaluation last week, so you will now be able to take the evaluation for each session within the session page. So the same place where you access the live link to get into this morning's recording, you can click the feedback button and give your comments and evaluate the speakers there. So we really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And it's especially critical if you're seeking any continuing education credits. So with those quick announcements, welcome back. Thank you for attending, and welcome anew to anyone who hasn't been here yet. And I will turn it over to Doug Michael, one of our board members, to introduce our first keynote for today.
Good morning, everybody. Well, it's my honor to introduce our first keynote presenter this morning, Elise Pratt Ronco, lecturer and assistant director of the Upward Bound program at the University of Maine, Farmington. Dr. Pratt Ronco earned her PhD in Applied Developmental and Educational Psychology at Boston College. And in addition to her work helping high school students achieve their potential through Upward Bound, she teaches courses in risk and resilience and poverty in education. Elise volunteers with the Sexual Assault Helpline and is a member of the Maine Disaster Behavioral Health Team. Good morning, Elise, and thank you for being here with us to discuss compassion fatigue, trauma stewardship, and the practice of facilitating resilience.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very honored to be your keynote this morning and bring you information about, I think, this very timely and relevant topic that we've actually been talking about for a long time prior to a pandemic, but it's especially relevant right now in wake of what we're doing and the work that we're doing. So I would like to extend an invitation to everyone this morning to be present. I think this topic in particular kind of calls for that. If we're going to talk about our own well-being, it's really important that we be present for and show up for ourselves. And I know that that's really hard to do. I've been attending conferences this fall, and it is so hard to not multitask right now. So I'll invite you to take this hour for yourself, to be here, be with me. It's also really, really difficult to be on this side of a presentation where you have no one interacting with you. So I have tried to make this interactive, and I'm going to ask you to give some feedback in the chat at different times so that I can kind of gauge what you're thinking, how you're receiving this information, and where we should go next. There's also a Q&A feature, and so I will check that at the end. If you have specific questions, you can also put them in the chat, and I'll be kind of watching that too. So whatever works for you works for me, and I'll also provide my contact information at the end if we don't get to answer your questions, because I really do want to follow up with you. So I have to be honest with you, this topic does not come easily to me. I love talking about student resilience, and I love talking about how we can help people who we're working with become resilient. But when it comes to talking about myself, I kind of get a little bit, I don't like the word self-care. I get all kind of like, no, I don't need to do that. I don't need to take a bubble bath. That's not appropriate. And it wasn't until I started thinking about the fact that I have an ethical responsibility to take care of myself so that I can continue to do the good work that I want to do, that I started to kind of reframe it in my head and see it a little bit differently. And that we have a responsibility as people doing good work to do no harm as well. And so that means taking care of ourselves in a way that allows us to be sustainable so that we're not losing that momentum, because our participants, our clients, are the people who we work with, they deserve it. Dr. Jody Carrington says, our kids, our employees, our teachers, the people we love are only going to be okay if the people who hold them are okay first. And so that's what I'm here today to talk about, is you, because I know that you put a lot of your attention and energy on others. And so I want to bring it back to the work that you do and why that's important. It's also very trendy these days to talk about stress in a kind of martyr way, right? So we make posts on social media about how stressed out we are. There's all these hashtags that get so much, use, especially around no sleep. Like if you didn't sleep last night, you are awesome. I'm running on 2 hours of sleep and 4 cups of coffee, and that looks like an achievement. And really that's not, and we shouldn't be praising that in our culture. We should be encouraging people to do things that take care of themselves. So before I totally jump into the topic, I will say that I don't have any disclosures to relate to you. So we'll move on. And the first thing I'd like to do in terms of the chat is have you give me a little bit about what's filling your bucket today or what's draining it. And you could just type a few words in the chat or a sentence. You can identify which is which, whatever works for you. While you're doing that, I thought it was really interesting that in last week's keynote, Dr. Shah asked the question, and the results were really high. He said, does the work I do addresses pressing issues? I am fulfilled by my work, and my work improves lives. And so those 3 things were rated very highly among the audience. And so it made me think, with that comes a lot of pressure and responsibility. If we feel all the time that the work that we're doing is pressing and changing lives, then it's going to make us feel like we have an obligation to do things. Does anybody have anything they want to put in the chat about what's filling their bucket or draining it? Okay, hopefully it's working. I'm going to assume that it is, and we'll just move. Oh, so I can't see it, maybe? Okay. All right. Doug, you're muted.
Sorry, I also do not have access to it.
Okay.
But maybe Heather may be able to see it.
Yep, I can go ahead and read some of the answers.
Okay, thanks.
So we have filling is being outside, another filling, someone voted this morning, my dogs, foliage, pictures of my nephew teaching my students tonight are all filling for people.
Nice. Heather, could you put a link to the discussion page for me in the chat? That way I can open it and be able to follow along. Thank you. All right, so I want to give you a little bit of background information about this idea of how trauma can impact us as well. So I'm sure many of you have been learning about how it impacts the people who we work with, but we also have to think about how it impacts us at the same time. I'm just going to open up. No, okay. I'm not going to be able to get in. Okay. So Heather, if there's anything that comes through on the chat, can you just share it with me? And I'll just keep following that along that way.
Yes, happy to.
Thank you. So prior to COVID-19, this topic was relevant to our work, as I said, and now it's even more important. The Strata Education Network has survey data that weekly tracks the impact of the pandemic on education and work, and they're finding that over 50% of people are reporting feeling concerned, cautious, worried, and worried about losing their jobs even. And then when we take a step back from March and we look at things like adverse childhood experiences, the work that's been done in the field of trauma, and better understanding how trauma impacts neuroscience, we know that our students, our participants, our people, our clients, they are facing incredible outcomes that are connected possibly to early trauma and how that impacts them. So let me just tell you a little bit about how your brain is impacted by trauma. And this relates to the people you work with, but I also want you to think about how it might vicariously impact you as well. And then when we layer on top of it the current state of the world, right? So when I teach people about the brain and how it's impacted by stress, I use the hand model. And so if you hold your hand in a fist and you tuck your thumb underneath and you curl your fingers over, this is your brain. And so these fingers here line up with the front of your brain, and the back of your hand is like the back of your neck and your brain stem. And so this is the prefrontal cortex, it's called. And this under here is the really primitive reptilian brain. You've heard about that before. This controls fight, flight, or freeze. So what happens is on a good day, everything is covered up. It's all working. Up here in your prefrontal cortex, this is all your important things called executive functions. This is where you plan. This is where you manage your emotions. This is where you see into the future, and you can see that there's more happening beyond today. All kinds of good things happen up here. When you get stressed, you flip your lid, and your prefrontal cortex disengages, and all that you're left to work with is that primitive reptilian brain, that fight, flight, or freeze. So it's great in a crisis because you don't want to have to be distracted by all of these very complex thought processes, right? You don't want to be thinking about how you feel, what's going to happen tomorrow, how what you do right now is going to impact later. You just want to save your own life, right? If you're in a very crisis situation, you want to fight, flight, or freeze. Unfortunately, our brains, that worked back when we lived in caves and tigers roamed outside our caves, and we had to be able to save our own lives in a split second. There was a tiger, we had to flip our lid, and we had to fight, flight, or freeze. Now we work in a world where we are experiencing chronic stress, right? And we're always kind of in this state. Children are always in this state. And really it's that you can't identify that, you can't, recognize the difference between a paper tiger or a real tiger, right? Your brain just does the same process no matter what. Unfortunately, we have something that, so our brains are being washed in these chemicals that they're not designed for long-term stress. They're really designed for acute periods of stress. And then you go back to kind of a basic level. So it's called allostatic load, and it's taking its toll. Our brains are fatigued, and if kids are starting out at a young age, feeling that chronic stress, right? It's building up over time. But on a daily basis, we're experiencing that too. And so some of the outcomes are listed here. So broadly, we have this idea of compassion fatigue. That's that exhaustion that comes from caring for others. Compassion satisfaction is the opposite of compassion fatigue. That's when you gain a fulfillment from caring and helping others, and it kind of is a balance, right? Like sometimes things are feeling really good, and then it shifts over to like, wow, I'm feeling really exhausted from this right now. And it can be compounded by all of your other things that are going on in your life. Secondary traumatic stress is that our more somatic symptoms like sleep disturbance, maybe gastrointestinal problems, emotional problems that result from you witnessing or working with people who have experienced traumatic stress. So it's the secondary level. Having a high level of empathy puts you at risk for experiencing these outcomes too, which I think if I did a poll, and I'm not going to right now, but if I asked you, you probably would identify yourself as empathic. That's what draws you to work that involves other people, but it also puts you at risk for these negative outcomes. Vicarious trauma is when we internalize the problems of others' traumatic experiences. So that kind of looks like PTSD kind of symptoms that you gain from working with people who have experienced trauma. It may lead to the helpers feeling distrustful or depressed or disconnected in that way. And then burnout is that kind of ultimate exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficiency. So just that, like, you just got nothing left and you're really bitter about it. And that is what we see, kind of when people get to right before they leave a career that's usually involving helping people. And then we have to think about the work of Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky, who is amazing. And if you have time, I would highly recommend her TED Talk about trauma stewardship. She's fantastic. And she identifies these things called trauma exposure responses. So there are several of them, and I'm gonna kind of give you some examples. And what I want you to do is kind of take note about where you might have seen this in your work, maybe in yourself, maybe in your colleagues, where you might have seen like, yeah, and I never maybe connected that to my exposure to someone else's trauma, like, that I didn't actually make that connection. But she gives practitioners a framework for better understanding their own exposure to trauma. And then her concept of trauma stewardship, which we're going to bridge into, is the entire conversation about how we come to do this work, how we're affected by it, and how we can make sense of it and learn from our experiences. And a steward, right, is someone who has careful and responsible management of something entrusted to their care. So as trauma stewards, right, we are carefully entrusted with what other people have experienced. And so we owe it to them to do good by what they've given us. So I'll just give you some examples, and I'm going to start at the top. So one of them is feeling helpless and hopeless. So when we feel helpless and hopeless, there are three things that are going on. One is that you feel personal responsibility for the situation, right? So if you feel personally responsible, you may feel helpless about what's going on. One is that you feel there's no possibility for relief. So that would make you feel helpless. And the third is that you feel like it's likely to repeat again in the future, right? So even if this current situation changes, it's likely to continue or to keep repeating, and that can make you feel hopeless or helpless. A sense that you can never do enough. I'm sure you can resonate with that. Hypervigilance, which is a symptom of PTSD, that can be as simple as feeling like when someone slams a door, you jump. That could also be that you always kind of feel like you're amped, you're on edge, you're waiting for the next thing. You're waiting for whatever's going to happen next. It's when you don't dare turn your phone off at night because some emergency might come through, something bad is going to happen, and you don't want to miss that call. And that comes from our past experience, not allowing our bodies to just relax and get some rest. Diminished creativity, which is about not being flexible in your thinking, kind of unwilling to think about alternatives. And there are moments, right? You can see that when you feel overwhelmed and someone says, have you tried this? That you're like, absolutely not. There is no way I'm doing that. I have I can't do one more thing. I can't think about this situation differently because again, your brain is like this. And we've got to bring that prefrontal cortex back online so that you can actually have logical thought, right? Until this comes back down, you're just not operating in a way that's going to be able to give you to be logical. Minimizing is about trivializing the situation by comparing it to something that we think is worse, or downplaying things that aren't extreme. And that can be when it gets to the kind of the bad place. It's when you actually do that with people you're working with, like, oh, you think this is bad, you don't want to do that. But when we do it with ourselves, like, why am I complaining? At least I have said this a billion times. Why am I upset about this pandemic? At least fill in the blank. Well, it's still been stressful. You know what I mean? Like, it's still been a difficult time. So, but we tend to minimize because that's what we do. Chronic exhaustion and physical ailments. So the sleep situation, I have to be honest with you, I don't sacrifice sleep for anything. That is my favorite thing to do. That is what I believe strongly in how reparative sleep can be. But I also know that some people, sleep is hard, like it doesn't happen, and how much that takes a toll on everything else in your life. It's so connected. The inability to listen, or deliberate avoidance. So, just being really like resistant and, just nope, not doing it, not hearing it. It's not happening. Sense of persecution. So when that comes from feeling like you don't have efficacy in your own life, like what you're doing doesn't actually result in any kind of change. So that can feel just like, you're being prosecuted. Guilt, that's a strong sign of trauma, when you feel guilty about things. And that can stand in your way of experiencing pleasure, right? Of giving yourself a chance to do something that you love because you feel guilty about it. Fear, so that can range from intense feelings of fear, but it can also be smaller, just feeling kind of fearful. And also being fearful of your own emotions or feeling vulnerable. So that kind of can take different forms. Anger and cynicism. Cynicism is a pretty sophisticated coping mechanism for dealing with anger. So when you kind of get to that area of like, it's sarcastic, but all the time and nothing is ever, okay. That can be a strong sign of this trauma exposure response. An inability to empathize, kind of a numbing feeling. So that can really happen when you're overwhelmed with stimuli, right? It can be when you are inundated with stimuli. It can be, you just have to numb out, right? You just have to say, I can't take anything more in. And that can make it so that it's really hard for you to empathize with other people. Empathy is about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's about saying, I wonder what it's like to be them. And when you really get, in this trauma response, you're like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know what it's like to be them. I don't even want to go there. Addictions, obviously, those can be escapes and ways of numbing ourselves so that we're not feeling whatever it is that we're feeling. And then there's this thing about this grandiosity or this inflated sense of your importance. And when we get hooked on involvement in other people's lives, we get that Messiah complex, right? That idea that we are dependent on the suffering of others, and because we need to relieve it. And that becomes our only mission, right? Is that I have to be in the middle of all of this trauma because then I feel like I have purpose. And that's not good. That's not good either, right? We have to be able to sort out what's about me and what's about them, and kind of work with it that way. So I'd love to hear in the chat, do you recognize any of these responses? And I'm not asking anyone to disclose anyone, and do not out anybody who you work with. But do you broadly recognize any of this? Does any of it resonate with you? Did you ever recognize it as a trauma response? Or maybe you just thought it was something else. And so any thoughts? And I'm going to try to access the chat so that I can kind of follow along. So go ahead and type some things in, and I'm going to work on that.
And while people are filling that one in, we did have some more responses to your other questions. So a lot of the drainings were around social media and work emails. And a lot of the fillings were being able to go outside, fall baking, trail rides, family, nature.
Nice.
And it looks like we're getting, can you see the responses
yes,
now?
now I'm in. This is great.
Okay, great.
Okay. Maybe too familiar, someone says. Yeah, the shutting down, just saying no, like nothing is gonna change the situation. Seeing it in the workplace. Yes, and the cynicism is hard sometimes to respond to. Like, what do you say to that when someone just won't? Yeah, seeing it in your friends, which is really hard. We look to our friends for support as well. So if they're not able to be there, that's hard. All right, thank you for that. Thanks for, and you're welcome to keep putting things in there too. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the presentation. All right. So as I said before, trauma stewardship, that's the overall practice of caring for oneself in order to remain effective at and avoid the negative effects of caring for others. So that's our ultimate goal, right? So I'm going to put this little resilience questionnaire in the chat for you. And if you can open it on your computer, and what you'll need a piece of paper, and you can everyone see my chat? Oh, maybe I'll put it in the discussion too. Go back to that. So if you can take a piece of paper and you can just take this little survey, and I don't want you to post, you don't have to post your scores or anything like that. But just go through and get a sense of your own resilience. And definitely when you're done, post in the chat that you're done. That way I can move on. And I'm going to check to see if there are any questions while you're doing this, and I'll give you about 5 minutes. But go ahead and look at this tool for self-reflection, and then let me know when you're done, and I'm going to check the questions. All right, Melissa, nice. So as you finish, I'm going to post a couple more questions for you to reflect on in the chat. So then you can kind of take the next step while people are finishing. Awesome. People are working on it. I've posted a couple more questions for you to reflect on if you want to write those in the chat as you finish. Just your reactions to the idea of trauma stewardship and how it relates to the work you do. Maybe you've already done some work on this with your team, and you have some ideas for others. And then one thing you could do to increase your own resilience. So while you're sharing some answers to those two questions, I just want to make a couple of points just about this tool in general. I think this is definitely for adults, but a couple of things that I like about it is that because it's a questionnaire about resilience, there's also this suggestive element, right? So when someone's reading those questions in their head, right, they're saying, "Oh, this is a way to be resilient. I never thought about that before." So it gives you some ideas built right into the list of the inventory. The other thing that I love about it is if you read down the second page where it gives you suggestions. When I came across this, I thought so often when we help people set goals or we think about improvement, we take our thing that is the least and we try to make it the most, right? We try to go from a 1 to a 5. And their suggestion here is take something that's a 3 and make it a 4. Take something that's a 4 and make it a 5, which makes perfect sense, right? Because you're already doing it or you're inclined to do it. And now you're just gonna crank it up a little bit. And that is going to bring you more success and resilience than trying to start a new habit or start something that you haven't done at all. And so that I've used a lot with others and with thinking about myself is I don't need to on New Year's Day make a New Year's resolution to do something that I have never done before. I can start with something I'm already doing and just intensify it, and that would have great effects. So those are just 2 points that I think are important with this tool. So I have some great comments here I'm going to read. So one thing that this person, Courtney, can do is take better care of myself and accept that it's okay to take time to put myself first sometimes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Not feeling guilty about it. Brendan says trauma stewardship seems like a useful framework for the work we do with educational partners who are working to build trauma responsive schools. Absolutely. Absolutely. I have found so many educators relieved to hear this concept, or just showing them the little comic, or not comic, but image that goes with when you fly, and they talk about putting the face mask on first, and they said you need to put it on yourself before you put it on someone else. I often work those into my presentations, even if they aren't about this topic, because I think it's important. And again, it goes back to the aha moment that I had, was that it isn't about putting your own mask on first, so that you can help other people. It's also so that you don't pass out in the aisle and get by all this stuff. Not only are you not effective, but you also might be in the way. And that to all of us, I think, probably sounds terrible. Like we don't want to be that, because we care too much about our work. Okay, practicing quiet mind and body techniques. I have a hard time sitting and just being. So this would be very important self-care activity for me to work on. Absolutely, Melissa. Also, there are other ways. I had to really learn. Again, I told you that the idea of self-care just kind of grates under my skin because I can't meditate. I can't sit still. And I just felt like a huge failure. And then I had to realize that, you know what, for me, making a list might be something that makes me feel good, or going to bed early, getting some sleep, whatever it is. I can make my own list and do what works for me. So flexible thinking, working hard at not feeling guilty for taking time. Absolutely. Engagement, building confidence, balancing my life more. Okay, hopefully my computer doesn't restart. It's telling me it needs to. Getting outside more often, and learning more about this topic could be, absolutely a thing. Yeah, so learning is one of my self-care things. When I'm scared, I learn. And that's why I ended up with a PhD, because I was too afraid to go be a teacher. And so I just said, like, I'll just stay in school, and it's fine, so whatever it is that takes care of you. Quiet your mind, absolutely. And setting the example. Yes. So any of you who are managers or who are supervisors, you do set the tone for your team. And it is important to think about that, about the example you're setting, and how does that reflect on your team, and how they feel about their ability to take care of themselves, and how do they feel supported. And I'll tell you at the end, which I guess we're almost there, about one thing for supervisors that might be useful to you in this process of working with people you supervise. So you're welcome to keep putting in your one next steps. I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of something too to kind of think about as we wrap this up, and then we'll see if there are questions. So if you've got questions that you can throw in the question thing, then go ahead. So it is also important in all of this to remember that one step in trauma stewardship and taking care of yourself is also realizing that you don't have to fix everything for other people. Like, there is a step that is in between doing nothing and doing everything. And I take this from the hospice world. Okay, so they use this term of holding space. And so if anybody has had any interactions with hospice, you will know that they're incredible people who come in and work with someone at the end of their life when they have decided that they're no longer going to search for a cure. And so when hospice comes in, they know that they can't change the outcome. In fact, one of their directives is to not hasten or prolong someone's life, that it's just in the middle. It's just being present through the transition. And is everyone still there? Okay, sorry, I don't know what happened. Okay, we're still here. Yes.
Yes, we're still here.
Okay. So let me just finish the thought. I don't know what happened. So the idea, right, that hospice is doing is that they're holding space for people. So they are saying, I can't change the outcome, and yet I'm going to be here with you until the end. And so holding space is about not fixing a problem for someone else, not being judgmental. It's about giving power back to those that it has been taken from. It's unconditional positive regard, which you all, I'm sure, have heard of. It's letting the people who you're working with make the decisions for themselves rather than making them for them or going in and changing the situation. And we're all wired for connection. That's what we are. So we are able to hold space for other people and be present and connected with them, and not have to feel like the weight of the world is on our shoulders, right? And so that is an act of trauma stewardship, is holding space for someone, is when you get into those situations and you're working with people who have really challenging lives, is that it is not your job. In fact, I would refrain from trying to get in there and change up what they're doing, or to be too involved, because that's not fair to them. They need to have the power and control in their life, and it's our job to just kind of hold space. So I think that is helpful for me when I start to feel overwhelmed and think, gosh, I don't think I can make a difference here, or what can I actually have an impact on? That's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that I be present and I hold space for those people who I'm working with. One other strategy I have for you, those of you who are supervisors or in supervisory positions, one way to help your team is to do a 15-minute check-in with your employees, with your people, every week. And that can sound like a lot. And I can tell you, when I heard about this, I was like, no, that's not possible. And of course, it is not possible for some people who manage a lot of other people. But I'll just tell you that what happens is you ask a couple of key questions. It's, what's going well? What do you want to keep doing? What do you want to stop doing? Okay. And how can I help you with that? And so it's a really quick conversation, but you get a chance to check in with your people, right? You get a chance to find out what's going on. What are the rocks in their shoes? What are they kind of working through, and how you can be helpful. And it's contained, right? It's a 15-minute little check-in. It's not going to be a long meeting. It's just a way to touch base, to help. And then again, your role is still to hold space, right? It's to assist and to be there, but not to solve the problems, to not, change the outcome, but simply to just check in and be like, okay, yeah. And so what do you want to do so that you can keep being effective in this job? So that has been a tool that has been very helpful for me. And we found it to work, those just quick check-ins. And your team knows that you're thinking about their well-being, because that's really important. So that's what I have for you, and I would love to take questions. And I know we have some screen freezing situation here, so let me try again. You didn't miss anything. Let's see. Here we are. Okay. The only last thing is my contact information, but I'd love to have questions if anyone has any, or comments, if they're just things that you would like to share about how this relates to your work, that you'd like to know more about. I can look up that TED Talk and throw that in the chat for you.
And we did have 2 questions, which you should be able to see, but if you can't, let me know and I can read them out.
Okay. So how would you use this as a supervisor of staff? I'm not sure if this one came in. Maybe if you're still there, Anne, maybe you could elaborate. Do you mean the 15-minute check-in, or were you talking more about broadly trauma stewardship? And then I can revisit that one. How can we try to change the culture of being so stressed, being a martyr? Right. How can we empathetically respond to this and try and coach the extreme stress isn't good for anyone? Yeah, I agree, Amanda. This is a tough balance, because that's what I said at the beginning. It's like amazing that people, it becomes a badge, right? Like, I've got so much going on. I'm so stressed, and like no one else is, right? And everyone is. And so I think it does start with thinking about how to educate your people about this concept, and maybe, for me, it took moving it into the academic realm that I really started to get my head around it. Like, oh, okay, there's research behind this, or, but that's just how I think. But maybe starting with wherever your people are at and what might appeal to them, and if that's what it is like, this is an obligation we have. And for people who the being a martyr thing is like, this is also an obligation to the people you work with, to be your best self, to do your best. to do no harm. And so how do we go about doing that in a way that is, effective? And it would be looking at, so where is that coming from? How does that get to a place where that becomes the ethos of the group, right? That's the group think, is we need to be constantly going. I think we got to this place also because we obviously, so many organizations have struggled, right? So we don't have great funding, and then we have to it's less people doing more, all of those kinds of things that have made it so people don't have a lot of choices, or they don't feel like they have a lot of choices. But I would start with that human connection, with trying to connect with people individually and find out where they're at, what's going on with them, and then trying to help them figure things out, from there. So I didn't hear back from the first question, so I'm just going to answer that broadly and tie it into what I just said, which is just that I think starting from a place of awareness and education is important. Maine is a leader in talking about trauma and resilience for the people we work with. And now we've got to apply it to ourselves, to our teachers, to especially our teachers right now, but to anybody who's working in any helping capacity. We need to start focusing on them, because we don't want to get to the point where these good people burn out, and then what? Because we have the need, and we need to be doing things. Are there any other questions, things that people have? Or discussion, you can also throw that. What do you want to keep doing? Okay, yep, sorry.
There was another one that came through from Nan. She was asking, what are the 3 questions to ask employees?
Oh, right. Sorry. So that would be, what's going well? Like, so that's a great one to start with, right? Because people want to be able to talk about what's going well. What do you want to keep doing? What do you want to stop doing? So that one kind of gets at sometimes that, like, I'd really like to not have to feel like X. And then the fourth one is just, so how can I help you? What can I do to help or support? And then maybe they can identify, gosh, I really need some more professional development in this area, or I need to learn more about this, or, and again, it helps people set their own goals because they're articulating it, and if you get this into a rhythm. So if you're interested in using this kind of 15-minute thing, you can have your people, depending if you use something like Google Calendar, you just tell your people, you schedule a meeting with me, whenever, for 15 minutes every week, or you could do every other week, whatever. And so they make the meeting, so they're in control. They've got the time chosen. And then you just do this quick check-in, and it gets really, really quick. Like, your first one might not be 15 minutes because it takes a little while, but really once they get the 4 points down, then it's just, they jump right in, like, okay, here's what's going really well. I got to tell you, I've also adapted this for my high school students, and I'll do this when I work. We meet with our students one-on-one once a month. And so I kind of, adapted this a little bit, and just, it's very open-ended, and it's fun because I can say, like, what's going really well for you? And what do you want to keep doing? What do you want to stop doing? Or what do you want to change? And that has worked really well too. I think the technical term in the corporate world is called the Impact 15. So you might find something if you Googled that. But we've adapted it in our office for a more educational setting. Okay. Doesn't look like there's anything else. We've had kind of a lull. My contact information is there. I urge you, please reach out if you want more information. If you want to try to schedule something to work with your team, we could do it individually. And of course, it could be more interactive. I can also give you resources, and yeah, be on
And we're
your-
actually not going to let you go yet. We did have some more questions come
Oh, I'm
through.
sorry, I can't see them. Huh.
That's okay. So this is from Lonnie. She asks, in terms of self-care of care workers, I've found that denial and fear of being thought weak is the biggest problem. In the
Yes, what
tobacco
a good
world, we
point.
found education wasn't enough to change behavior. Do you have other ideas?
Can you just say that last part again?
In the tobacco world, we have found that education wasn't enough to change behavior. Do you have any other ideas?
Among your staff?
Yes.
Not enough to change behaviors. Okay. I wonder if there could be some kind of like, well, it would have to be a group commitment, right? Like if so rather than saying like, here's what we're going to do, but having everybody give input and have them develop what this thing is going to be, what this initiative or how they're going to approach this thing. Because I think that's the issue, right? Is when you say like there's guilt or feelings, it's if not everyone is participating, then you feel like, oh, that little voice in your head starts saying, I'm being judged by that person who isn't participating, right? Who isn't buying in to what we're doing. And so trying to get everybody to buy in so that you can then, make change. But I always go back to that it's so individualized, I feel this way about education, that we can't do a one size fits all. And I think it really comes down to knowing your group or getting to know them and then figuring out what would work for them so that you can be most effective. Because we know that it doesn't work when you just say, oh, this would, we're going to impose this on you. I will say what motivates people is choice and feeling like you're in power and you have control, because anxiety comes from not feeling like you're in control. And right now we don't feel like we have a lot of control in the world, right? So anytime that you can give people choice and they can feel agency is going to go a long way in terms of making them feel like they can actually do something. So getting input, having them self-design things, having a wide array of choice. Those are all things that will help people to feel motivated to do whatever it is for change. Anything else?
Thank you. Yes, we have at least a couple more.
Okay,
this
great.
next one is around being aware of stress. And so do you have suggestions for mindfulness practices or any other sort of practice that would allow you to see your stress better so that you can be aware of it before it becomes completely obvious and burdensome?
Right. I can say that I am not great at mindfulness. That is something that I am not great. If whoever asked that question, if you want to send me an email, I know I have a lot of resources that I just can't think of off the top of my head, but I'll pull some things together and send them your way. But there are some really, a lot of people are using apps right now that are very effective in terms of, just check-ins, breathing, asking you to kind of stop and think, scan your body. Where am I at? What am I feeling? And then to be able to pause and recognize those things. And so I think that for people who are at those stages where they're not even recognizing that they have stress yet, that can be really good. I think also, and again, it's about the luxury of time and resources. If you had those two things, time and resources, would it be beneficial to get your team together and to have like a retreat, a day-long workshop, something where they're getting to be reflective and they're getting to think about themselves and what they need personally. And then, would this app work for me? Or would I ignore it? Do I hate my phone so much that I wouldn't actually respond when it tells me to do something? Or does mindfulness for me mean cooking dinner? And so that's what I need to do, is sit there and do that. Because it really is so personal and defined for each person, which is, I think, why it took me so long to come to it, because I had this narrow definition and I tried to fit myself in those activities that were told to me that were the things I was supposed to be doing, and they didn't work, or I couldn't vibe with them. And so I just thought, well, I'm just not meant to be relaxed. Like, that's just, we joke about it in my family that I have to schedule time for relaxation. I have to be diligent about it. But I'm sorry, things are going haywire. All right, what else?
It looks like we have just one more that we'll have time for.
Okay.
And this is from Amanda, and she asks, are there any methods for approaching supervisors who don't seem to help with stress management and supportive self-care and boundaries, such as sending late night emails?
It's kind of what I was subtly getting at with the, you set the example. And so, yeah, that is really hard. I mean, my hope is that you have regular meetings with your supervisor and you do feel like you could bring that stuff up. And if that isn't the case, right? So there's no forum and you feel like it has to be out of the blue, like, okay, I've just got to have this awkward conversation. One thing might be to suggest something like what we just talked about with this check-in, say, hey, I went to this conference. I heard this thing. I thought it might be cool to try, and it would give us a chance to connect more and to, especially if you're working remotely, like, that's a great, lead in. And then maybe you would be able to say like, okay, so this is really hard for me. And I think it's fair to ask, because I will say I am guilty of sending late night emails, and it's all about me. It's that I feel anxious if I don't respond, and I'm afraid I'll forget, right? So I'm satisfying my need because I can't sleep if I don't do it. But if someone said, but if I said to someone, look, I want you to know, like, if I send you an email, I'm not expecting a response. It is purely for me, So could you flip it and say, to your supervisor, like, I'm just wondering what your expectation is, right? So when I see that email at 9:00, my instinct is that I have to respond, right? And it raises my stress level, and I'm not really sure what your expectation is. And maybe the person will say, oh my God, no, I just have no life. And I just, no, like, or maybe it just really stresses me out and I'm laying there in bed and I can't sleep anyway. So I'm scrolling through, I think also as much as you can take personal responsibility, that's really important. So it might be that you have to not check your email after this time, and you have to set that boundary. But I think it's fair to have an open conversation and say, what's your expectation? Because I'm trying really hard to have these clear boundaries, or I'm trying really hard to set this in my life so that I can be the best I can be when I'm at work. And I just want you to know that that's where I'm coming from. I'm not ignoring you. And as long as you're okay with that, is that good? If your supervisor says, no, I expect you to be on demand 24/7, then I think that's another conversation that probably, I don't know. You could email me about that and maybe we could talk about it.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions, and we are butting up against 10:00.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Thank you so much. Doug, I want to check in. Do you have any final words?
Oh, I just want to add my thanks, Elise. You've given us a lot of good information to think about and really how we might help ourselves to sustain what we're doing. Thank you.
Good luck, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you. Yes, we appreciate you being here. Please don't forget to fill out the evaluation that's under feedback in this session page that you access the live stream from. There'll be a recording there. We did have a request for your slides, Elise. So if you want to shoot those over, we can put those up on the session page too.
Yep, they haven't changed from the ones I sent you. So you can just use those ones. Yep.
Great. Then those will be accessible on the session page. Everyone has Elise's contact information. So thank you so much. And hopefully we'll see everyone back here and more in about 10 minutes for the start of our second keynote on hunger and health.
Have a great day.
Thank you all.